Hi everyone, welcome back to the Bookshelf Odyssey. My name is Art, and today I just want to give you some tips for reading Victorian literature. This month is Victober, and we are celebrating Victorian literature by reading it throughout the month. There's different reading challenges and prompts. You probably know what it is by now. If not, links will be in the show notes that you can check out there to find out more about it. I love reading Victorian literature, and I'm finding more and more that the books and stories and novels from the 1800s are some of my favorite. And yeah, many of them can be a very difficult read. I haven't always been able to read Victorian literature, but as I've grown in my reading ability, so has my tastes have deepened and improved, and I'm able to kind of work my way through those stories now. But I still struggle once in a while. I think in my TBR video, there were a couple of novels I mentioned, like Deerbrook by Harriet Martineau, and then there's one by George Eliot. The name escapes me now. But I had to DNF them even just last year because it was just it was too much for my brain to handle at the time. So even somebody who reads a lot of Victorian literature, sometimes, we just got to be in the right frame of mind. But if that's something that you struggle with, or you're hoping that you can read better or faster, all those things, I've got a few tips for you that might help with that. I don't necessarily want to give you like hacks on how to read faster, because I think Victorian literature invites you to slow down actually and to savor the text like you would, a fine meal. And it's, and something I've had to tell myself, this is not a rush. We're not trying to get through to see who can read the most in a month or whatever. So if you're only able to read one Victorian novel a year, but you read it well, that's a success. And that's part of what that's part of what Victober is all about. The ones I'm sharing are the ones that have worked for me. But I guess first, before that, I do want to talk about a little bit about my history with Victorian literature. As a young teenager, my reading tastes were quickly deepening, and I read a lot, but I was reading a lot of like Hardy Boys, The Three Investigators, Tom Swift, anything I could get my hands on. I started picking up some short story collections, those that were collected by Alfred Hitchcock, reading some classic scary stories. Started in a little bit on Sherlock Holmes and was really enjoying those, but I needed something more. I kept looking for something more, something that would challenge me. And I had wonderful libraries that I had the privilege of living by. The librarians would always love to see me coming because I would check out just stacks of books. And they helped me to discover authors like Ray Bradbury and really Charles Dickens. But I was familiar with Dickens's name and knew that he had written A Christmas Carol. And I heard a commercial for a mini series. I think it was on Great Expectations. And I want to say it was one that Anthony Hopkins starred in. But the trailer sounded so intriguing, and it just captured that I don't know what you call it, that especially those beginning chapters where you get that the gothic cemetery and the spooky fog and the criminal coming out of the shadows, and all that I thought, that sounds amazing. I want to read that book. So I got Great Expectations from the library, and I made it about 5 or 6, 7 chapters in. I don't know. It wasn't very far, and I had to put it down. I knew I liked it, but it was very hard reading. It was taking me a very long time to read. And I just realized that I needed to grow some more. There were vocabulary I didn't understand. There was cultural things I didn't quite understand. So I just wasn't quite ready for it. And I tried some things here and there, but eventually I settled in on reading A Christmas Carol, which was a very, very good read for me. And that's a book I would recommend somebody to start with if you've never read Victorian literature, or if you've never read Charles Dickens. As weird as it might be, start with his Christmas book, A Christmas Carol, because a couple things with that is that the story's familiar to you. Whether you've read the book or not, you know the story. And his writing is a lot shorter. I think, a lot easier, but it also has enough depth to it that somebody like me who has read a lot of Victorian literature can still draw some amazing insights from the book, as well as somebody who's reading Victorian literature for the first time. So start something short like that would be, I guess, really my first hint is don't try to tackle, War and Peace or well, I guess that's not Victorian, but don't jump right to Bleak House. That's it. Maybe you did, and more power to you. But that's going to be one that will take some building up of your Victorian muscles. And then when I read Christmas Carol, I knew that there had to be more like this, more wonderful stories. So some of the first novels I tackled were Silas Marner by George Eliot, and I did eventually get to read through Great Expectations. Right into the time after I graduated high school and before college, I decided, as kind of my high school graduation challenge, I was going to read Moby Dick. So that that was kind of one of those big classics that everybody says you need to have read. I hadn't read it yet, so I thought, okay, this summer before I start college, I'm going to read Moby Dick just to say I've read it. I don't know if I'll like it or not. And it took me about 2 months to get through it, I think. That was before I discovered the joy of audiobooks, but I got through it and I loved it. I got caught up in the plot and the story and the excitement of being on the sea and chasing the whales and all that. And even the chapters that kind of sidetrack and talk about whaling and talk about how to the different kinds of whales and the biology of whales and all that. It was just thrilling. And really, from that point, I haven't looked back. I've just dived in head first. I started working my way through Dickens because he was just an author I immediately felt a connection to. But in my early 20s, when my wife and I were still newly married, and she was working on a teaching degree, and so during her student teaching, she taught A Tale of Two Cities. So she thought it would be fun, or maybe I did, that we would read that together at home. We'd talk about it, and then that would help her have discussion questions for class. And I thought that was amazing. And just walking through that book with her really just opened up the power and the depth of what literature can have for you. And since then, I've just been reading over the years more and more, with more and more frequency, finding my love for Victorian literature. And then booktube comes along and it's like dropping gasoline on a fire. I have become, I think my wife lovingly puts it, obsessed. I guess there's this TikTok challenge going around where wives ask their husbands, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And it turns out that I guess it's supposed to show that men think about the Roman Empire a lot more than people would think. And so my wife asked me that, just not on TikTok. She was just curious, and I said, "What are you talking about? I've hardly ever thought of the Roman Empire, And then we kind of laugh at that, and she said, "Yeah, I know you. You're probably thinking about how you can get away with dressing up as a Victorian and I'm usually thinking about the Victorian age. What's one of the things I've enjoyed." This is completely off topic now, but I've enjoyed reading not just the novels, but reading history books about the time period, because that really enhances my understanding of the books. So there's another tip I didn't even write down, is to read some history books about the Victorian age, and that should help you read better about what's happening in Victorian novels. It's like in the Regency era, when I began to realize that women needed to be married, not because they were a bunch of love-addicted psychos, but because if they didn't get married, there was a serious financial burden for them, and there was some serious uncertainty about their future and how they would be taken care of. So that just, for Jane Austen, if I can talk about her for a minute, really opened up those books to me to understand that's not just about, people desperate to fall in love, but for like the Bennett family, they had five daughters. The fear was real to get them married off. So that changed everything in how I even understood, Jane Austen. So same with Dickens and works like that. The more I understood the history behind the book, the more I understood the book. And then now I'm finding that since I've read all of Dickens and I've read all of Austen and several others, now I'm enjoying rereading them, but also enjoying reading their biographies and literary criticisms about their books, and that in hand helps enhance those books even more. So that's all freebie stuff. Here's some of the tips I've actually written down. First of all, audiobooks. Audiobooks is real reading. Don't let anyone tell you differently. I remember the first time I heard that just a couple years ago, somebody said, audiobooks isn't really reading. And I thought about that for a minute and said, well, I think that'll come as a surprise to people who are blind. Among other things, audiobooks is such a great way to enhance your reading. If the book is particularly hard, I'll listen to the audiobook while I'm reading along in the book itself. And for some reason, that combination really helps me get what's happening in the story and it helps. In fact, sometimes I've dropped off listening to the audiobook and just kept reading with my eyes because it was helpful to, I don't know if it just got me in the right frame of mind to read the book and understand the book, but it was helpful to get me through the book. If that's something you might want to try, that's a trick I have found to be very helpful. And my wife, she's currently a librarian, and she said recently she came across several articles about that, whether or not audiobooks are reading or not. And the research is showing that the same parts of the brain light up in the same way, whether you're reading it or whether you're listening to it. It's pretty much the same. So yeah, I'm not going to argue with my wife. She's a librarian. She knows what she's talking about. So pick up an audiobook if you're struggling. Victorian literature really lends itself to being read aloud. Whenever I have a chance to do that, I love it. I just love hearing those words spoken. They're so beautiful. Also, I want to say go easy on yourself. You can't have read everything all at once. And I say that because you'll find people who will be kind of dismissive or critical of your reading and say, oh, well, you haven't read this book? Well, you call yourself a fan of Victorian literature. How come you haven't read Jane Eyre? I mean, you have to. And, maybe, but maybe you just haven't gotten to it yet. Or maybe you just didn't like it, and so you didn't finish reading it. That's okay. Don't let them criticize you for that. Find what you like and enjoy it. And realize that, you can't have read everything. So just give it time. I didn't read Jane Eyre until, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And I would have said even back then that I loved Victorian literature, especially as you're starting out, just realize there is a lot out there. You can't read it all and you can't love it all. I mean, maybe you can, but it's okay if you don't. And that kind of bounces to my to a next hint or trick. Or tip. My next tip is that it's okay if an author isn't for you. I know some authors, some booktubers have said, George Eliot, what isn't for them. They've tried her and just couldn't get through it, and that's fine. Others have. For me, it's Wuthering Heights. There are some who even say that Dickens isn't that great or great for them. And, that's fine. That's their opinion. I just unfriend them, unfollow them, and block them. It's fine. No, just kidding. But, if something's not for you, that's okay. Because, again, there's plenty. For me, the book I really struggled with was Wuthering Heights. And, so many people, they're either passionately loving it or hating it. But I hear this a lot, that the story is, one of the best ever. And it makes it in the top 10 lists of all the Victorian novels. And I've read it several times. And I think somebody else I watched on booktube said this, and I've stolen it from them. But they said, they can appreciate it for what it is, but we just don't like it. And I think that's exactly where I am. The imagery, the language, the words that Emily Bronte uses are beautiful and powerful and so incredible, but I just cannot get through that book without wanting to throw it across the room. And part of that is the characters in it are just so unpleasant. I just, there's a level of unpleasantness I can handle, and Wuthering Heights is just too much for me. Um, Same with like Jane Eyre. I really enjoy that story, but like Mr. Rochester really almost just ruins that novel for me. And I'm just not a big fan of that gruff, almost mean kind of guy. Give me a Mr. Knightley over a Mr. Rochester any day. I also want to give you another hint would be embrace rereading. If you're reading through a novel and maybe a chapter didn't make sense, go back and read it again. Or keep pushing forward. That will help start some of the previous chapters are starting to make sense and you'll begin to figure it out. But one thing I have found I really enjoy doing is listening to a classic on audiobook. And if I enjoyed it, I'll go back, not right away, but at some point, a year or two later, I'll go back and reread it in book form and take a slower time to go through it because I now know the overall story. I kind of know the ins and outs of what's going to happen, but I'm able to read deeper and slower with understanding of where the story is and where it's going. And you begin to see some deeper insights. You catch on to more of like foreshadowing and things like that that really enhance the reading. And I have found, especially with Dickens and like Jane Austen, I keep including her. I know she's not Victorian, but she's still in that time frame that I enjoy reading from in the 1800s. And the Bronte sisters, those I've read multiple times, and each time has been better than the previous time for the most part. So I would say, if you have the time and the inclination to reread, do it. Not every book can hold up under multiple readings, but just about every Victorian novel I've reread has not only upheld itself during a second reading or third reading or fourth reading, but each time it just improves. You know what kind of reader you are probably. If you can't handle zipping through big, thick, deep, dense books, that's fine. Just, if you end up only reading one this month or half of one, that's half that you wouldn't have read before. So there are some zippers and some plotters, I guess we'll call them. Those that zip through a book and those that plod through a book. Either one of them is perfectly okay. Find out what your strength is and go for it. I think sometimes we can put pressure on ourselves to look at our reading as a checklist that I got to read 10 books today versus maybe I'm going to read for 10 minutes today. There was one book I was really struggling to get through. And in this particular case, I realized it was because I was trying to read a page amount as a goal for every day, and it was just too much. So I switched it to reading a time amount. It's going to read for half an hour instead of trying to read, a chapter. And though it slowed it down, it really took a lot of pressure off of me. So basically, I am giving you permission to read however works best for you. And I want to absolve you of all book guilt. It's okay to not like the big top 10 classics. It's okay to listen to it on audiobook versus reading it. It's okay to go slower. It's okay to go faster. I know some people read 20 or more books in a month, and others say, well, how can you do that? That's impossible. How are you even, absorbing anything? And some don't, but some do. And it's because they can just do that. That's their brain just works that way. And, we're all different. So there's some tips I hope that will work for you. I know it's kind of a rambly discussion. One of these days I'll get myself organized and present it in maybe a more concise order. But I guess this has just been another verbal dump from yours truly. So, all right, with that pleasant image in mind, thank you all for watching today. If you have been thinking about reading Victorian literature, aren't sure where to start, I hope this video can help. If you're an old hat at reading, hopefully some of these tips and hints will give you a new way to enjoy a novel. Yeah, let me know below what have been some things that have worked for you, because I'm always looking for new ways to read. It's such a fascinating topic, reading and the way we process information. I don't know. It's really neat. I guess I'm a language nerd in that way. So anyway, that's all I have for today. Until next time, everyone, happy Victober and happy reading.